pleased to hear about Silicon Happy Valley. When Jody sent out the email to all of us in the Applied Research Lab, and I saw that this year's talk was about the culture of engineering, I just had to apply for a speaking spot. In my role as the program director at Lunar Lion, I actually use this word culture to praise our students over and over again. When people ask me, what's the program about, what are they doing, I almost from the beginning start saying they've created their own culture around space exploration, about the technology that they're developing, about what they're doing. And this is an important thing to us as a team. This campus, like many other large universities, we've got subcultures all over the place. Right? There's the wrestling culture, the volleyball culture, there's Thon. These cultures reflect the larger culture of the university itself, of course. Education, research, and service. And these things tie us together. In my 7 years here at Penn State, I've come to appreciate that the biggest, most enthusiastic, if you will, expression of culture here, tailgating on football weekend, it's more about reconnecting and strengthening ties to friends and family than it is about which direction the ball's going when it's in our quarterback's hands. And it was an eye-opener for me to see that. As engineers, we all play an important role in whatever city we move on to, from Penn State or whatever our university was, and the companies that we work at as well. To borrow a phrase from Petrosky, to engineer is human. And as Corey talked, I love the quote that you put up at the end there from Von Karman. Engineers create the future, create a world that never was. I stole that one, I wrote it down. That's excellent. And I love to read about guys like that, and I'm surprised I haven't come across that one. So, thank you. And Penn State teaches all of us. I didn't go here, but I feel like Penn State right now is teaching me, to be a good person, a good citizen, and good engineers. And as good engineers, we must serve our friends and our family, the communities that we live in, the companies that we work for, and this country that has given us so many good things. Now Lunar Lion students have created their own culture around space exploration here on campus. And as this culture grows, I think it's really important. I believe that the roots of what Penn State, it's at the roots, I should say, of what Penn State is all about. So I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very grateful to the School of Electrical Engineering, Computer Science, and the Alumni Society for inviting me to speak. This is great. This is an important discussion. So one thing you might guess about me is that I see the world through the eyes of a physicist, or the eyes of physics, I should say. And I like to think of physics as the group of stories that we tell ourselves about how the world works. And as engineers and scientists, we usually learn these stories through long strings of equations, but sometimes a simple English can suffice. For example, you might be able to explain the second law of thermodynamics by saying that if you don't do work on a system, it decays into chaos, right? You must put energy into an isolated system in order to create and maintain order. And if you don't do that, you get a mess, like my garage. It's a really good example of how orderly systems can decay into a real big mess. I spent half of yesterday afternoon cleaning it up, and even then I didn't put a picture of it here for you to see, because it's still a mess. But this is important, and as I see here on campus, and as I see the Penn Staters that have gone through Lunar Lion and out into the community, I see them as doing work to put order into their communities, into their companies, into their labs, and that's what we all have to do. So thank you to the Alumni Society for putting this event together. This is, I believe, a really important part of the overall mission of Penn State. So Lunar Lion began over 5 years ago, and we were the only university-led team in the Google Lunar X Prize. A year ago, before the December 2015 deadline for that competition, we decided to leave the competition. Fundraising is hard, technology development is hard, and running a mission that was mostly about the publicity, the pictures and the images that came back from the moon, and not the science that comes with space exploration, was a little bit it was a little bit in discord, I should say, with the mission of the university and the mission of JPL and the mission of what I believe all space exploration should first and foremost be, which is you define the science and you go and you build a system that meets that science goal, and anything extra beyond that is wasteful and expensive and can cause failure that leads to disaster. And so what we're doing right now is we are rebuilding this program. We've been given enough funding to run for the next 3 years. We have 20 students working for us this summer. We're continuing our development of a lunar lander, which is at the core of what you need, the technology that you need to actually get from here to the surface of the moon. The pieces exist to get off the ground, to get on a trajectory to the moon. You can't go out and buy from anybody right now the lander that you need to just drop down from a trajectory to the moon or around the moon onto the surface. This is something that we have done. This is something that can be done, but it's not a thing that you can just go buy right now. So over the next year, we'll continue both the development of our landing system, but we will redesign our mission to meet science goals that are in accord with what the planetary science community has said are the important things we need to do next to the moon. We're currently recruiting geosciences students, undergraduate geosciences students, to look through all the literature that's out there, the plans and the goals that NASA has set for different parts of exploration of the moon. And working on the mission Mercury Messenger, I learned about how important it is to know what the science is in order to build, with your engineering skills, the thing that will achieve that science. And those science goals are written down right now by NASA. And so our geosciences students are going to be digging into all of those plans in order to recraft our mission. One day we may get to launch our spacecraft to the moon. In the meantime, though, we will continue to send our students out to the jobs that they're choosing in this growing industry, in this very competitive field, to continue space exploration as I believe it should be. So I want to tell you about the people who are doing this work. I want you to understand that it was an eye-opener to me to begin this program and think, hey, I can build on what I've done on missions like Messenger and continue to do that good work. To take that and be completely flipped on my head and all of a sudden realize, wait a minute, I'm here at Penn State. This isn't going to be me doing any of this. I'm lucky enough to get to be the advisor and suggest the direction and point out where there's a flaw in the plan. But the technology development of those plans and the actual work of getting it done is being done by Penn State students. So who are these people that make up this recent generation of Penn State students, the millennials that I work with who are so passionate about space exploration? The Lunar Lion team is made up of dozens of students, mostly undergraduates, working here at Penn State with me as their head coach, as their head cheerleader almost, to develop the system, to find a way to send the first student-built spacecraft to the moon. And this involves everything from the trajectory design to program management and fundraising. These students, born into this rising generation, called the millennials, have taken on a challenge that I believe is of great significance to us today. But what exactly is a millennial? Who are we talking about here? I did some research because when somebody asked me to talk about millennials, I was like, I've heard the word, I don't know what it means. So this is not my research. These are things that I learned that other people are learning about millennials. So they were born between 1980 and the year 2000, generally speaking. And generally speaking, they're pro-technology and typically grew up with computers in their homes. They're the most highly connected generation. They're so connected with their peers and the rest of the world, and they use the internet not as a tool, the way that I do, but it really is a way of life. They are the most highly educated generation in history. The most highly educated generation in history. They're very curious. They quickly research everything from purchases that they might make to potential Russian-built launch vehicles for their lunar lander. And if you want to ask me more about that, I'd love to tell you a great story about an ambitious student and a native Russian speaker here on campus. They routinely, almost compulsively check with their peers through communication technology that is unprecedented in its power, and they check on all matters: life, love, money, fun, food, politics, both global and local. And these people are risk takers, and they're ambitious, and they're aware of their surroundings, the world that they live in, and they care. Because of 9/11, they believe that life is short and that they should not just accept business as usual, and they want to leave this world a better place than they found it. That's who these people are. I like this list of characteristics. It reminds me of a list that you might use to describe a good leader. Okay? They are ambitious, they're informed, they're open-minded, they're flexible and comfortable with risk. And this millennial generation, leadership is part of the package. And as an engineer, I like the idea of combining the technical with leadership, specifically leadership for service. This is the culture of Penn State, and that's who these students really are. Now, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a philosopher. I don't conduct research that helps to understand who these people are, but I'm a space systems engineer with a dream. It's a waking dream, and that's that we're living at the very beginning of humanity's adventure into space. The very beginning. And right now I'm getting to work with people who are going to take that dream forward. This dream comes with two very clear benefits. The first is that space exploration does something amazing. I mean, Corey talked about it earlier. There are wonders out in our world that we can't possibly understand, see, or even know are out there without sending a spacecraft up to see it for us. Whether you're talking about a telescope like Hubble that looks out to the stars and the galaxies, or the Cassini spacecraft that discovered this subsurface ocean and water jets out at Enceladus. We can't do this without spacecraft. Space exploration. Okay, so I love that you brought that up, because I forgot that every subsurface and water ocean in the solar system was discovered with a magnetometer.
That's right.
You can only find these things out with magnetometers. You fly by the planet, the magnetic field says there's something sloshing around underneath there. There's something ionized that's doing this. And so it's, what is it? It's Enceladus, it's Titan, Europa, and it's amazing. And when you think about what a magnetometer is, you can explain it to the basics of it to a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, and they go, oh yeah, I get it, but you can do this. And when Cassini flew through these plumes, they didn't just detect the water, they also found, it's forming a new ring, and this ring is made up of water, salt, minerals, hydrocarbons. Okay, right now, this is going on, right now. And think about this. What does this mean, right? Right now, water, salt, minerals, hydrocarbons. I just described what you and I are all made out of, okay? So could there be microbes living right now at Enceladus? I don't know. You don't know. NASA doesn't know. Are they growing? Are they evolving? Is there anything there? And if there isn't, what does that mean? But we'll never know the answer to these questions unless we build another spacecraft to follow Cassini, to go out there and to land and test the stuff coming out of these cracks in a way that Cassini can't, because its instruments were not designed to detect life. So space exploration uniquely adds to the sum total knowledge of the human race. And it's not a bad way to spend your day or spend a career. And millennials are flocking to this exciting field to build their careers and to make their contributions to the world. The second benefit is growth to our economy, for our country, and for other countries that are pursuing space exploration. In 2014, there were 20 commercial launch contracts signed. And I think last year was even more, but I haven't seen the data on it for 2015 yet. And while many of these 20 commercial launch contracts were for we're putting up satellites that were built in America, or would be built in America, many of them are not. And all but 2 of those launches will be providing telecommunications or data collection for people overseas, not here in America. And make no mistake, this is good business for those countries and for the companies doing this work, and for the people who own those satellites. Space technology and access continues to be the mark of the advanced countries on our planet. But those advanced countries are no longer just superpowers. Today, besides Russia and the United States, China, Japan, and India have all sent spacecraft to explore the moon. China landed a spacecraft on the moon just a couple of years ago. There's a rover there now that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work, and you don't really know when to trust the PR that comes out of the Chinese space agency, but you can trust them to do what they're going to say they do. They're really good at that. They said, we're going to land a spacecraft on the moon, it's going to have a rover, we're going to do it in this time frame, and they did it. And last year, India put a spacecraft in orbit around Mars for like $79 million. India did this. So science, this is good science, and it's good investment for rising economics, for rising countries in this world. And sorry, wrong slide. Do you see here? This is just a smattering of new companies that are being tracked by a company called New Space Global, and they collect information about these companies, their investment, the technology, the services that they're providing, understanding their business plan and their leaders. And this company, New Space Global, is yet another new company in the space industry itself. And this collection spans from launch providers to satellite builders to folks who are selling data coming down from space to Google and to others around the globe. And Penn State graduates, students who worked on the Lunar Lion, are already filling up the ranks of these companies. And this is critical, I think, to the future of our country and the future of humanity. So one of these companies, SpaceX, has now twice landed the first stage of their launch vehicle, the Falcon 9, after they put a paying customer, a payload, into orbit. Okay, so they launched, and the upper stage separated from the first stage, and they put a spacecraft into orbit, sent it to the space station. And I think the first one was actually a commercial satellite that went into orbit, and just recently they launched a system to the space station and landed the first stage, the most expensive part of the launch vehicle, multi-million-dollar unit that until now we have just thrown away in the ocean after launch. But they landed it. Most recently, they landed on a barge out in the ocean, which they tried several times and failed. I think they still have a little bit of work to do. They missed the X by about 10, 15 feet. I don't know. But back in December, they nailed it, not just on a barge, but at the Cape in Florida, on land. They took a Falcon 9, launched a paying commercial payload into space, and landed the first stage back on the Earth. And the commercial implications of this to the space industry are huge. And it was really fun for me, because at like 2 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from one of my first students who was on the launch team for this. He was a little bit, happy and perhaps a bit drunk, but very excited to have been a part of this team. And I'm really pleased to say that there are actually 5 Lunar Lions who are now working at SpaceX. In a recent article interviewing, I think it was one of the vice presidents for recruiting or something at SpaceX, the tone was basically, of all the 7 billion people on the planet, why should we pick you to work here at SpaceX? And so 5 of those people out of the 7 billion that we share this planet with came from here, and I'm really proud of that. So I want to tell you a little bit about what the students are doing. Oh, let me go back a second. I'm sorry. So I get to work with this generation, and they're going to take this adventure and this expansion into space to the next level, really the next level. I mean, this is. I graduated in 1996 from college, and there were only 11 aerospace engineers on the podium with me, and I'm the only one who's still working in the space industry. And I know the students that I'm working with today are going to make a much bigger difference than my classmates are. So I get to work with them, and working with them has given me some insight into how they operate, and given me a lot of hope for the future. It's a future that we can create with them if we let them lead. Right? Today we're seeing in real time the pioneers of this rapidly growing commercial space industry, business leaders from Generation X, leading the charge. And we know this transition, they're leading the charge, making this transition from mostly government-funded work, which needs to continue. I think we should triple NASA's budget. People talk about doubling it. I think that's a weak position to take. But the transition, the important transition that's going on right now is this transition to commercial. And that really can cause acceleration in terms of progress. While these Gen Xers are kicking things off, business leaders like Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, it's the millennial generation that I think is going to really make private spaceflight common. It took many generations to grow from the pioneers of human air flight to the modern industry that we have today, and it's going to take generations to do the same with space. As Patrick Gorski, one of our student team leaders, who's now working at Ball Aerospace, said to me, he said the millennials are the space generation, not the boomers, not the folks who built Apollo, his generation, and he's telling me this. Perhaps this is because for a great part of their lives, there's always been somebody in space on the International Space Station. It's not extraordinary to them that somebody is in space. Okay, it's expected that someone's there, and that more people should go there. And so, what I believe is extraordinary is that young men like Patrick can look and see their place, the place of this generation, so clearly in its historical context. Right, and that's really interesting. This idea that guys like Patrick can see themselves and their place in history. And I believe that history has got certain bottlenecks where really important things happen, pivot points, if you will, on which the future depends. And I believe we're at one of those pivot points, one of those bottlenecks right now. And you can't tell, of course. This is speculation. It's hard to judge what our impact is going to have in the future, what the impact of our times is going to have on our future. But when you look back, some of those bottlenecks are a lot easier to see. So 10,000 years ago, we first domesticated animals. 5,000 years ago, we first wrote down our languages to preserve the wisdom of our times. 2,500 years ago, we first practiced democracy. That was a big deal, right? 500 years ago, we first circumnavigated the globe. 112 years ago, we took off and started to fly. And 45 years ago, we first stepped on the moon. And each of these moments was crucial to what came after. If you look at the span of time that we call history, I believe that we're right now living in that moment when Neil and Buzz first stepped on the moon. That was just yesterday. That wasn't a long time ago. And when you look at each one of these events, you find leaders who helped make it happen. You know, Kennedy's willpower led to Buzz and Neil walking on the moon. He took chances to make that happen. He was a risk taker, just like the kids that I'm working with. Orville and Wilbur, their daring led to the worldwide airline industry that's now part of everyday life. One of them died in one of their own airplanes. They were risk takers too. You know, the Athenian political innovation, to trust their fellow citizens, even when they might not agree with them, they were taking risks as well. And that eventually led to this great experiment in democracy that we call America. And you might say that a visionary, footsore hunter who no longer wanted to chase down his meals, instead began to tend sheep. You know, he set in motion a long sequence of events that led to the founding of the Farmers High School here in 1855, 10,000 years later. So we don't know, you know, what's going to come in the next few years, but let me tell you about what's going to happen this summer. So what is Penn State doing today to prepare these students for this new work, this growing and exciting field? In the case of Lunar Lion, Penn State has given them an outlet for the generation-wide ambition, an outlet that requires curiosity, that is honed to a fine edge through their education to enable their success. They've been given an opportunity to have an impact on this global movement, more and more people into space, more and more technology into space, more value from space. With China and Japan orbiting the moon with their spacecraft, and India now orbiting Mars, you know, space is a global movement, and its strategic and its economic importance is greater than it's ever been. And this is also an opportunity for them to engage in a field that requires something that is native to them. It requires them to seek out the input and approval of their peers as part of the standard process for building your system, your spacecraft. This is Systems Engineering 101. Let's get a design review going. These students are always doing design reviews on, you know, what color shoe to buy next week by going to the comments column at the bottom of the web page at Zappos. This is part of who they are. It's the right time in history and the right opportunity for this very right generation to make its mark. So to be specific, Lunar Lions, they're learning the ins and outs of designing the plumbing, the mechanical systems for rocket engine testing and operations. They've built this rocket test stand that you see here. We've used it now to execute over 100 tests. This is a 100-pound hydrogen peroxide engine that we actually purchased from a company in Mexico, believe it or not. And they've done a great job improving the output from the nozzle, our understanding of throttling and control over the whole system. They're designing the control system that we need to throttle those engines, 4 engines simultaneously, actually, while monitoring pressure, temperature, vehicle pitch, roll, and yaw angles. There'll be a quiz on this diagram later. We're passing out tests, right? So they've, sorry, next page. They've designed this prototype that you see here. It's a vehicle that will demonstrate the quality of these engines for the final descent and landing that we hope our spacecraft will one day make on the moon. Those engines put out enough thrust at, we believe, a high enough efficiency to do that last short descent and landing to the moon. They've actually built this system. This picture's a little dark, but you can see pretty well here. Oh, sorry. The propellant tank is there in the middle with the pressure and tank out front. One of the engines is actually mounted in the front corner. We finished the first integration of this system last summer, and we took it out to our field test site where we began to check it out to see if it was going to do the things that it needed to do. And sure enough, it did not. Okay, so when you've got a rocket engine, when you've got a rocket system full of very hazardous chemicals like 90% hydrogen peroxide, the first time you test it with a fluid in it, it's not peroxide. You put water in it. And you make sure that all your fittings are closed up tight, that your valves do what they're supposed to do when you tell them to do it. And so I was very glad that we had our first dry run in August where we filled it up with water. And when the water started leaking out of some of our fittings, nobody got set on fire by the peroxide.
Would you call that a wet run?
That was a wet run, yes. So these are, we're also planning, so this summer we are planning to refit some of our plumbing, update some of our electronics, and take the craft out to a test site where on the table that you see here we'll be able to bolt it down and repeat that wet test and see if we can make it not so wet. But then execute, hopefully by the end of the summer, a static test where bolted to that table we can perform 4 engines all firing at once and measure, again, pressure, temperature, all the things that we can to characterize whether or not the engines are performing within this system as well as we expect them to based on our testing on the other system, the individual engine testing. We have over 20 students, 20 of whom are paid to work with me for this summer to finish off the planning and execution of these tests. All the while maintaining the keen sense of fashion that we come to expect from today's college students. So, all right, so, sorry. So what is living at the beginning of the space age, mean to all of us individually, to this community that these students have become, to this team that really acts like a team in a way that I'm very proud of. It's hard to believe that the first hunter turned herdsman, could foresee that his choices would eventually lead to the founding of Penn State. That's a pretty long stretch for him to think about. Or the Athenians thought that overthrowing the current tyrant